Okay, so what we are going over today is going to be a bit of an umbrella statement. And the reason why I say that is there's a lot of things that can go wrong with your unit that will keep it from coming on. So what we're talking about here are some common issues that it can be and what you're looking for. Now, we'll get into shorts a little bit, but that's going to be covered in another video on how you can systematically search for and possibly find some shorts within your unit. We're going to cover gas and electric. A lot of people that come into our store want answers right away as to why their unit isn't coming on. And the deal is, a technician's going to have to go through the same thing that you are. So let's look at it this way. You go to the doctor and you give the doctor symptoms. He's not going to know right away without running some tests, some diagnostics, some blood work, what is going on. And even then, they can kind of surmise what might be going on, but they're not going to know exactly. And this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to take a look at your symptoms and we're going to diagnose based off of what you know and what you look for. So if you handle the situation smartly, instead of making it hard on yourself and just parts changing, trying to figure it out, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at some common things, and then on some later videos, we'll go into some uncommon things. So let's look into some possible issues that can be causing your unit not to come on. A common thing I see that many people do, homeowners, apartment maintenance, handymen that come over, guys that work out of their trucks, they always want to jump to the control board. And a lot of times, this is not the issue. So instead of jumping just to the board straight away, let's look into first, and I know, again, this always sounds really dumb when you're trying to tell people this, but look for and make sure that you are getting power to your unit. Also, if you have a gas unit, there is something called a door switch between your main furnace area where all of your burners, your inducer motor, limit switches, and then where your blower compartment is. That is a safety switch, and that has to be working correctly in order to allow that 120 volts to come into your unit so that it works. The other thing is to make sure that your transformer is putting out those 24 volts. And remember, these are step-down transformers. So first, when placing our meter on the transformer, make sure you are getting, in fact, 120 volts to your unit. And then make sure that it is outputting the 24 volts. Now with AC current, it's alternating, which means you should not get exactly 120 volts. You should be sitting somewhere around 122. And then on the 24 volt side, you should be sitting somewhere around 26 to 28 volts. So first, make sure that from your door switch to your unit, which just check at the transformer, it's easier at first. Make sure you are in fact getting power. If you are not getting power, at that point what you're looking at is either the door switch, a weak breaker, could be a power surge. So if you have something like a high side voltage short on your transformer, it could be a power surge that had come through and took that out. So make sure you do have your 120. If you are in fact getting the 120 to your transformer, you know you have power. The other thing to make sure with power, and I know it sounds really dumb, sometimes people forget to either plug the unit back in or flip the light switch. So I know, it sounds dumb, but just make sure that you do actually have power going to the unit. The next thing is to make sure that your transformer is sending the 24 volts into your unit to your board. Also, let's go ahead and take a look at what you can check for on your board to make sure that we can also rule out your thermostat and potentially your control board, as well as a few other things. So let's go take a look at the workbench and see what else we need to look at. Okay, there's a few easy things that we can look for once we know where to look. So when you're inside your unit, as we were speaking about earlier, we want to make sure that we are actually getting our 120 volts here, or if you are on an electric system, your 240 here. This is a universal transformer, so yours might look a little different. It might have all the legs on one side like this. It could be angled in there different. But this is where your main power, your high voltage, is going to be coming through. So your high side here, what you're doing is you're going to put your voltmeter on one of each of these legs. Again, make sure you are not testing against ground because you can get some feedback. So here we're going to simulate our power, and you'll know it's a transformer because you'll see this magnetic core here, your electromagnetic core. You can't see it in these, but there is in fact a coil in here. You might be able to see yours, but really that's not super common with a lot of the newer ones. You can kind of see a little bit of that shiny plastic in there. But it's going to look mostly like this. So we're going to simulate our power here. I'm going to use our 120, so we've got our neutral and our 120. So with our meter set to volts AC, we are then going to turn the call for heat or cool on, depending on which you're trying to attempt here, because this is the power for everything on your inside unit and your outside unit, unless, of course, some of you do have a transformer on outside units, or package units can be on a rooftop, and it's going to be a little different. So now we're going to check and make sure we are getting our voltage first and foremost, just so you don't waste your time having to go through checking everything without realizing that you might not have power. All right, let me get my guys here. There we go. Like we mentioned earlier, we should be getting somewhere between 122 to 123 volts AC. So now you know you're getting power, or you're not getting power. So if you're not reading that 120 volts, you now know what the issue could be. At least one of those. So once you know you are getting your high side power, we then need to know if your transformer is putting out your 24 volts to the low side power. Oh, let's see here. Because if that doesn't send out your 24 volts, of course nothing is going to come on. All of that's going to run off of that 24 volts AC. So now that we know we've got high side, and again, your 24 volts can also say just load on there. You can say 24 in common, or have both like this one. But this is where, again, we're going to put one lead on each. We're going to turn on our power, and there you go. Should be between 26 to 28 volts. So always make sure you've got power coming into your unit before assuming that something could be going on with your control board. And a lot of people like to jump to the control board as being the culprit. So now that we know this is okay, or we've stopped there and we know that, hey, I'm not getting power, or my transformer is not working, how do we check and make sure that it's not our board? One of the things it's also good to check for is on your control board. Now, some of the older units might not have these, but you should have somewhere on your board this guy, which this is a 3-amp fuse. Some of the trains and a few other models I've seen, I'm pretty sure some of Mana did some 5-amp for a little bit as well. You'll see 5-amp fuses like this. If you see a higher fuse in there than a 5 or a 3, that is not going to catch that low voltage short, and it will take out your board and your transformer. Automotive fuses are higher, and they're not suitable for your HVAC units. So always make sure that you have no more than a 5-amp fuse in there, and most units, their control boards use a 3. Okay, now, so what are we looking for with these little guys? Well, as you can see, see if I can get this guy to focus on there a little bit better. There we go. As you can see, there's this little connection here. And that has to be solid. If there's a break or a small charring there, you know you've popped a fuse. And if you've popped your fuse, nothing will come on. So double check that your fuse is okay when you're going through to diagnose and make sure that your control board is not the culprit. And of course, checking your fuses to make sure that those are still good. Most of you are going to have single stage furnaces. 2-stage can be a little different, but what we've got here is your basic setup for your thermostat wires. Now, when you're wanting to see if there is actually a call for heat on your control board, we need to find out if you're getting the 24 volts or the call from the thermostat here where your wires go. You're going to check between R and W, and this is your call for heat. R being your hot, W to get your heat to come on. I have seen some where the G has to also be in circuit for either one, but for the most part, your call for heating is always going to come in right here. So you're going to check with your meter and make sure that you are getting your 24 volts AC for the call from the thermostat on the R and the W. If you are in fact getting your 24 volts here, you know again your thermostat is calling for heat. You can also check on the R and Y if you're checking for cooling. So, to rule out the thermostat, you need to know the thermostat is actually sending the signal for the heat or the cool to come on. Now, the difference between heating and cooling is something we'll go into with this control board, because there's a difference when calling for cooling versus heat. We'll get into that when we start getting into our AC series. But for now, know that R and W should have the call from the thermostat for heat. So let's break that down a little bit. We know from our transformer that it is sending the 24 volts. We know that's good. We can rule that out. And then we know that our thermostat is sending voltage to call the heat at the unit, but there is no light on this board. And the newer boards, you can't see the lights on these because they're itty bitty LED lights in here. But yeah, in the older ones, you can actually see those bulbs sticking out. But when your heating fails, it should blink a fault code. These are generally below your wiring diagrams, as we've shown in other videos, and it will tell you what's going on. Now, if that light does not come on, the board is not getting power or it is bad. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, just make sure you do have your 120 or 240 going into the unit. Make sure it's not something like a power surge that happened that took out your high side power. If you have gas heating, your door switch, possibly, as we spoke about, a breaker, just kind of tick all those boxes off so you're not having to get more and more frustrated because you've replaced parts and none of it is working. So always, first and foremost, make sure you do have power and make sure that your transformer is sending that 24 volts and that your door switch is actually functioning like it should. Because if you know you're getting power to the unit, but there's no power getting into the unit, it's going to be the door switch on your gas furnaces more than likely. Now with air handlers, while the newer ones are going to have those fan control, those boards that'll connect and whatnot, just like here, obviously it's going to be different because it's going to go directly to the unit instead of being on this board. You'll see all your thermostat wires coming up to the unit. That doesn't change. You need to check between your R and your W and make sure that you are getting the call from the thermostat and that there is power coming into your unit, as well as checking your transformer between your 240 and your common, and then of course making sure that you are getting that 24 volts out. So now that you know you are getting all of your power, it is sending the call, but still nothing is coming on, and your fuse is good. What you'll want to do is pull the board out of the unit. Of course, make sure that you have taken pictures of where all your wires go. Make sure that you don't forget to put those wires back, because obviously it's not going to work anyway, even if you replace it with a new control board. So a lot of times you can see for sure, if you turn this over and you notice a really dark spot, charred, black, really, really dark. Now keep in mind on older boards, which can be tan or a lighter green, diodes get hot. And because they get hot with time, age is going to yellow this right here. It's going to turn like a light brown, kind of a yellowy color. But as long as you can see all of our trails are good, they're not split, and there's no char marks where these relays are here on the back, then you know, at least by looking at it, you can kind of tell that there are no breaks in any of these trails where the solders are going to. or that your relays have burned and it's very noticeable. Now, some of you might have old enough units that you actually do not have a fuse on your control board. A lot of times, if a technician comes out to work on a unit, they can put one of these inline fuse holders in there, which are really great to have to catch any low voltage shorts. I'd recommend putting one of these that would go from your transformer on your 24 volt side. Now these would basically be cut, stripped back, and then wire nutted, or however you want to do it. If you want to do the heat shrink, which that's really what I prefer to do, it's a lot more safe. Just tie them in to one of these legs. Do not put this one on both. Okay, it only needs to go on one side. And this will prevent a short on your low voltage. And this guy just goes in here like that. Make sure it's all the way in there and snug. And then, boop, just closes right over there. And that'll catch a low voltage short. Now we'll go into diagnosing shorts and what you need to do for that. Also, if you wanted to, you could wire nut something like this in with your terminals. You know, you can just make a cheaper version of that. Obviously, you wouldn't have these female connectors here. You could just strip these back as well and wire nut them in on the one leg like we spoke about. So that's another way. So once we've kind of ruled all of this out and we've caught, hopefully, what's been going on with our gas units, it's going to really help to know all of these things, so that way you're not replacing your control board, you know, your transformer. And in a previous video, I had spoken about knowing whether a transformer is good or bad, because if it's bad, nothing's going to come on. Heat, cool, either one. If something comes on in your unit, you see a light on your control board, if your cooling comes on but not your heat, your transformer is doing its job and it is fine. Just as a side note, technicians, if you do find a popped fuse or you do find a low voltage short, and this can go for homeowners, but you know, honestly, don't buy something if it's just a matter of replacing a few fuses. But these are extremely helpful to have when testing. And you do not leave this in a unit. This is not a permanent fuse. What this does is it's a resettable fuse. So if this pops, it's just a matter of pushing a button in to reset it, and then from there you can locate where that short is coming from if you do in fact replace everything and you're still popping fuses. Now again, we'll get into shorts and what you need to do to look for them, but for now, just know this is a good thing to have when diagnosing why the unit might not be coming on. Left my drill at home. Gonna have to do this by hand. Probably gonna lose this screw. Alright. Now, this might look different than what you've got. Remember, every piece of equipment is unique, brand to brand. They've got their own design. And then, of course, the age of the unit comes into factor. So as you can see, we've got our transformer here. And it will be labeled on one of your sides. This one's got a sticker over here that you can't see. could look different, but they're all going to have this core here with the 2 high side power wires coming in, and then of course the 24-volt side coming out. Now this is going to have a fan control relay at this board right here. This is going to be your breaker here. Some of you might have a bunch of breakers in a row. You're going to have your sequencers, and yours can look different. They can be mounted on its side. You can have 3 stacks, you can have 2, and we do have a video over sequencers and testing them. Bottom line is, if your blower motor isn't even coming on any setting, whether it's heat, cool, fan on, the place to go for that first is to make sure, again, that you have power coming in. Now, your thermostat wires are going to be coming in. It's those little tiny small wires, really, really thin, small gauge wire like this. That's going to be the call from the thermostat coming in, like we spoke about, that's going to connect to the power of the unit. That's basically sending the 24 volts in on your low side power. On your sequencers, you can see your low side voltage here on the bottom. This is your 24 volts here. See if I can get a little more light on that. These bottom legs here are your 24 volts. There's going to be a delay on startup depending on your timing for your sequencer, which again, if you reference my sequencers video, it talks about what all these timings mean. Of course, what's inside of the sequencers that makes them function. Now, this is something you need to check for when nothing is coming on. You're going to need to test those, which we did break that down in the video on how to test it to make sure that that might not be working. Always check your breaker and make sure, and obviously do not electrocute yourself when you turn this on, but what you're checking for is you're wanting to make sure that you are getting your 240 volts coming in, and that your breaker is actually making and completing the circuit to allow the 240 out so that the unit can power on. If you are hearing clicks from relays when you come out here to check your heating and make sure that it is in fact at least making some sort of sound, some sort of relay pulling in so that it can make contacts in order to turn the heating on, then the next thing would go to, if you're hearing that click, but your motor is not coming on, you're not seeing spinning, you're not hearing the motor come on, and this is an X13 motor, which is a constant torque. This one's going to have where it goes directly to, for the most part, go directly to power. It's always going to have a constant 240 volts on it, and then it's going to call on that fan relay, which in case this one, that's going to go in here and call for your fan motor to come on. Now, if it's a normal PSC motor, it can be a little different, but know that if it is not getting the 24 volts, or if you're not getting the high side power, that will not come on. The other option is that if you are hearing the relays, you've tested your sequencers, it's at least making some sort of noise, you know potentially your motor might be bad, or your board is not sending the 24 volts to your motor. So what you're needing to find out here is back to the basics, making sure you do have power that all of your relays are closing like they should, that your sequencer is closing and it is allowing that high side voltage through, and that there are no breaks in your wires. Look for any burned or shorted wires, and making sure that if you are not getting that 24 volts into the unit from your transformer, it's a matter of finding out if either the transformer is bad, whether there's no high side power coming in, or it's not allowing, like we said a moment ago, the 24 out, or if you are not getting the call from the thermostat for your heating. So always save yourself a lot of heartache by going through these steps. Always, always, always check power. Check continuity on your breaker. And of course, you can check continuity here if you're just wanting to make sure it's making good contacts here in the center. And of course, once you flip your machine on in order to call for heating or cooling, and you're going to flip these on to make sure that you are in fact getting your 240 volts in and out, ruling power out, ruling relays out, sequencers, of course our transformer, which would be the more obvious one. And if you are hearing clicking and you are getting your power coming through your sequencers and your fan relay, and that's for people that have what's called a PSC motor. This is a constant torque, so it's going to have high side power on it here. And then the 24 volts is what is going to actually tell the motor to come on. So with PSC motors, wiring is going to be a little different, and you're going to have a fan relay in here. If you don't have that type of fan relay up here, or some sort of fan control that turns the motor on, you might also have an issue with your board. So what we're doing here when we are diagnosing what could cause your unit not to come on is power first. So if you're wanting to know how to test sequencers, again, there is a video, which I can link it below, that we talk about how to test sequencers and relays. All right, everyone, that concludes our video for this week. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you can think of something I might have forgotten about, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I will get to them as soon as possible. And hopefully you've learned something from this, and I was able to help you in some way figuring out what is going on with your unit and why it might not be coming on. All right, everyone, well, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys.